Hello and welcome to episode 4 of the Build a Block series, which we're going to build a Gutenberg block. In this episode, we're going to focus on user input. So the previous one, we had a static block that would just display in the editor. In this one, we want to prompt the user to type something in. In our example, it's going to be a URL, and then we're going to save that to attributes. The component we're going to use is text control, and then we'll talk about how to use attributes. So let's dive in. So in our code, we have the static. The component we want to use, and you can see what available components if you go to the developer.wordpress.org, the block editor handbook, and then inside of here is a component reference. So if you look in there, it has all sorts of different components you can use to build your block, and everything from drop downs to times to all sorts of different controls, panels and popovers. Makes it really easy to build a block. In ours, we want to use the text control. So this will be a prompt for input. And let's look at the markup for it. We're going to import it in from the components directory, or the components package, sorry. And then we're going to use the text control. But before we use that, we want to pass into each of the functions, the edit and the save, are the attributes. And the attributes is where the block kind of stores its data. It's a property, and it's a property of the block here, and we'll show how to define it. The property we're going to create is URL, and then you put the rules on how to define that attribute. And then when this is defined, we'll pass that value into each edit and save. So the edit and save are functions of the attributes of the block. So whatever the block's attributes are, those get passed into the edit function, and then it'll render out whatever it needs to for edit. Likewise for save, whatever data is in the attributes gets passed to the save and they'll be rendered out. There's an additional function. This is the function set attributes, which you use to update the attributes, and it'll save it out. So in here, we're going to use the text control, and the text control has a label. We'll just give it any string we want. It has a value, and for that, it's going to be attributes URL, which matches this URL here. And then there's going to be a function. When this is updated, it will call this function, pass the value of what's updated. And this is where we want to use this set attributes function and set URL to the value. If this syntax is a little unfamiliar, it actually has nothing to do with Gutenberg or React or anything. It's all based on, it's all ES6 kind of shorter syntax. This just is a kind of shortcut on how to define a function. And on the second part, it's just a function with the return not put in. So if there's no bracket and no return, it just assumes whatever this value is returned. It'll just call this part of the function. And it doesn't really matter. We're not using what gets returned. We just want to call that function and set the attribute. So this will prompt the user, and then we want to save the attribute in the save part. So in here, we can put in, we'll just write it out to the screen. We'll probably want to do something with it a little bit more later, but let's just do that. And then we need to define how we're going to parse it. And I'm just going to do a class name. We'll call it that because it doesn't much matter what the class name is, but just to show it doesn't have to match. And so then for the attributes, how these get set, go back to the handbook, and under developer documentation, block API reference, there's an attributes section. And so this talks about all about the attributes being a property of the block. And then you define them inside here. You're going to define what type it is. URL is just a string. It could be a number, it could be an array there. But for this, we're just going to be a string. And then you define how it's going to be pulled out of this content. So when your block loads, Gutenberg will parse the saved content and then figure out what attributes it can set from that saved content and then set them based on these rules. So this first example shows using a attribute of a tag. So if this was an image tag and it said image source, source is the attribute here. And so it would set the URL string to that source. So if you had an image tag with this image, this would get saved at that URL. Another example, These are the types could be used inside of the type field. Is text. Text is the inside part of a tag. So if you had a fig caption tag with this content, then you define the source is text, the inner part of that tag, and the selector is finding that tag. Another example using a class name. So using the selector, same thing in text, so it's going to be the inner part of the tag, and then using the selector to find that class name. And there's other ways you can do complex queries to figure it out, and there's different ways. But in this example, we're just going to use this class name, and so we are going to use the source is going to be the text. That just means it's the inner part of the tag that we have, this inner part of the tag. And then the selector to figure out what tag to use is going to be the class name, the URL. And this is why I just changed it, so you can see this matches there. It's unrelated to the actual URL parameter. This one matches that parameter. So that should do it. This will create an edit the attributes, has a text control, they'll type it in, they'll get saved to the attribute URL. And then on the save, I'll write this out. So let's build that and see what we have. So in the post, when I reload, it's actually going to break the previous block. So the block validates itself. So it says, here's what was saved in the post. It tries to parse this and pull the data out of it and pass that data to here. And we use that URL. This is URL class. It's not found in the previous post body, so it can't really, it doesn't know what to do. And so it generates a save function and says, hey, I don't know what to do with this. And it kind of invalidates the block, saying something's not quite right. So it's something to be aware of when you're changing. This is to be known because we changed the signature of the save function. So one thing to be aware of, during development, it's not a big deal. But once you publish something and it goes out, if you save the signature of the save function, too greatly or too in a way it can't parse it, then it could be a problem. All right, so if we insert our new QR code block, here's our URL, there's our prompt for it, and then you can type it in. And as I type, it's calling the change function, so it saves it. There's no save button to hit or anything like that. So it's there, and then when I save the post, it will save all of that to post content. You can look at the code editor. Here's the part that it saved. And so then when I view the post, it will show up and it just shows the URL. And that is it. We are typing and it saves it off and we are good. So then we can use that in the future. Thank you so much.